So, hi everyone, and welcome back to the second edition of the webinar, What Makes Art Powerful, hosted by Wei-Ling Gallery. Thank you all for being here with us today. My name is Amanda, and I'm moderating today's sharing sessions. So in case you missed our first session this morning, just as a short introduction, this webinar is a project that we started during the worldwide lockdown, which was a strange phenomenon for all of us. I'm sure it is for you too, that made us even more aware of how important art is actually to our lives. And by inviting speakers from different disciplines, we'd like to explore how art has become a medium for them to deal with the questions of loss, suffering, struggle, and other challenges that we are faced with in life. So this morning, we spoke with Rahmi Diala-Rasati on how her dance practice becomes a medium for her to revisit memories of the past. Performing arts, movements, and body gestures are her tools to reconnect with history and family members who have passed, and how it has taught her an important lesson, and that is acceptance. So now, as you know, we are pleased to start our second session of the webinar featuring Anida Yoeu. So let's please welcome Anida onto the screen. So Anida currently lives in Seattle, where she lives and works as an artist. Her works span performance, installation, video, poetry, public encounters, and political agitation. So hi, Anida.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
Okay. So thank you, Anida, for being here with us. I'm just going to start with a little bit of introduction about yourself. So Anida is the first generation Muslim Khmer woman born in Cambodia and raised in Chicago. She left Cambodia as a child, and after residing for over 3 decades outside of the country, Anida returned to work in Phnom Penh in 2011 as part of her US Fulbright Fellowship. Up till today, Anida has performed and exhibited at Palais de Tokyo, Musée d'Art Contemporain Lyon, Malay Heritage Center, Fukuoka Asian Art Museum, and Queensland Art Gallery, amongst many others, of course. Last year, in 2019, we had the honor to have her show one of her projects called The Buddhist Bug here at Wei-Ling Contemporary, Kuala Lumpur. So we're going to share you a link to a short preview of the performance that she did during the opening night of this exhibition. So there was this installation, and she basically performed with the installation itself. So without waiting any longer, let's just hear from the artist herself. Today, Anida will be talking about how she uses art to explore her hybrid identities and the feeling of displacement that comes with it. To spark discussion surrounding the question of otherness and also to evoke social changes eventually. So she will be sharing a special preview also of her work called The Red Chador, which will be her last appearance for maybe for the year or the next 2 years, right, Anida?
Yeah, I don't know. Depends.
Depends. Okay. So anyway, it's a very special work, and I'm really happy that we have the opportunity today to see the preview of this work. So in case you have any questions for her, please feel free to drop it in the question box. And by the end of this sharing session, I will read it out to Anida for her to answer. Okay, so I think it's time for me to off my webcam now and let you speak, Anida, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is kind of strange because I'm not used to this platform where I don't get to see the audience at all, even virtually. So I first want to say I'd like to give a land acknowledgement. Here in Tacoma, I am calling in, working, raising my family, and taking advantages of the resources that I've been blessed with on the unceded land of the Puyallup tribe. And they are the original custodians of this land that I am currently on. And I hope that everyone out there that's paying attention now, I hope you just take a minute to think about and acknowledge the original peoples of the land that you are currently on. So with that in mind, I wanted to just thank Wei-Ling Gallery for offering me this platform. I know that there's a lot of time differences around the world as people from multiple countries and cities. And usually at this point, I would ask the audience to also contribute by putting their land acknowledgement into the chat and letting us know where they are all virtually coming into conversation with. And then that way, at least I get some interaction. I don't think this platform allows you to do that or allows me to do that. But if you would like to let us know or let the organizers know where you are coming from, that would be great. Otherwise, I think that what I'll do now is talk about sort of setting the tone for where things are at. So obviously, one thing we all have in common right now is that we are all in this global pandemic in which the coronavirus is something that our countries are mindful of, and the cities we come from, and maybe even the village that you're currently in. If it doesn't directly affect you, it is definitely affecting some people that may be around you or within your vicinity, but certainly it is directly impacting Americans right now, with us having the largest cases of the coronavirus. And it is kind of, a difficult situation we're in that we have some difficulties in our government. And we are coming up on an election, and that's going to be a really important moment. This pandemic has also caused a lot of mental health issues in people that maybe weren't so obvious before, but is getting exacerbated by what they may be experiencing as economic hardships are hitting folks, and there are impacts for everybody else that may be around that. And I'm saying this because in this moment I'm having some major difficulties in my own life, and it's affecting my professional life as well as an artist. And so I've been really thinking about the level of productivity and this exhaustive way that artists are often asked to work for oftentimes very little in payment for the kind of labor that's pushed forth. And I think I'm definitely one of those artists, and I've been really blessed with a lot of opportunities and continue to be blessed with those opportunities. But moving forward, I am definitely going to be more strategic about what I do and how I engage, and who I decide to share the work with. And that's so that I can really slow down my pace a little bit more to focus on my own well-being and for my family. And so I think a lot of you who are joining us may have seen that this is going to be one of my last appearances for a little bit, in terms of something really major. And again, that's for me to kind of take my energy inside a little bit, focusing on family and mental health and well-being, and learning what it means to engage in self-care. I think that's going to be my lesson. I understand if you're into horoscopes, you might be interested in something called Saturn Returns. It came when you were 27 years old. For me, 27 years old, it's usually like your life is in a kind of upheaval, or there's some great changes that you're embracing. Well, that 27 cycle is coming up again, and usually people experience this next. Their Saturn returning again near the age of 50. So in their late 40s to their 50, which is something that I am coming into. I'm not 50 yet. But with that, I think, you know, it's just a reminder to pause, especially those of us who are engaged in really difficult conversations in which the art has a difficult place in institutions, because we're tackling things that are perceived to be controversial, or for performance artists like myself, we're constantly engaged in encounters. It's the reason why I feel art and art making is so powerful for me, is the chance to engage with my work with random people, with the public, or what I tend to call the unsuspecting public, the people who don't expect to see art. And it also works for the people who do come, who come to galleries, who come to museums to see art. But the most powerful part for me is when I get to share the work as a shared experience where I am performing a persona, a moment, an extension of the things I'm working out in my head through performance with just anybody, a stranger, a random person, and what I'm calling the unsuspecting public. So when people come into work and they get to really experience a work of art, I believe that there are changes that are happening. And I'm not looking for like huge change with a capital C. I'm looking for moments of engagement that perhaps in that moment they are seeing something and experience something and feeling something they haven't felt before. And that is creating little impacts internally for people to think, to start to think the very basic questions when you come into performance art, which is, what am I seeing? What am I feeling? What is happening to me? What is it that the artist might be saying? You know, and those are all ways to engage with the work so that it puts the onus on the person viewing and on the people viewing and experiencing the work to think a little bit more and to keep asking questions, because a lot of times in my own work, it is about asking questions. It's not about giving people answers. I might be setting up a situation that you think I'm giving answers, but I'm not. I'm setting up a situation that's highly visual, highly performative, that is actually supposed to ask more questions, and that is supposed to turn sort of the mirror to you, to the person viewing, as to what is it that you think is going on, and what is it that you carry with you that is helping you to understand, to break down all the things that I'm setting up, and then what's the sort of authentic feeling that is coming out of this experience. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and just simply go through some of the images in my work if you're not familiar with the work. And then we will also see a video of the newer work that has this video I'm going to share with the audience is at the end of this presentation, and we're all going to play the video on our own player. And then we're going to come back after 9 minutes of viewing it and then just kind of answer questions. So with that, I'm going to share screen. I don't know, is this on for sharing screen? So what makes art powerful? And I always begin with this quote, which is, artists need to create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy. And it's a quote from Farm Lab and Lauren Vaughn, the artist who created this neon sign. And for me, this is a really powerful idea because it really gets at what I'm trying to do. And essentially, I believe that art and art as creation and as a creative way of engaging is the counter to war, is the counter to destruction. They're more than often anti-war stances that are within the act of creating. And so for me, I always think about like the reasons why I have to create the work that I do at the scales. A lot of my work is pretty epic and serial. It's at this stage of my work, it's never small. I mean, those exercises I've engaged in before, or they live in sketches, or they live as beginnings of writings. But when I sort of fully execute a work, it's usually performance and installation rooted, and it's large, and you'll see that. And I always think about my family history and our beginnings, our very humble beginnings as refugees, resulting in the war in Cambodia and the loss of, nearly 2 million people in Cambodia in the mid 1970s. And so for me, performance in particular as a medium is something that is really important, in that it reminds me of all these words you're seeing on the screen. It's, it heals, it provokes, it sort of triggers meaning, it is immediate, it takes time, it happens. Like the act of it happening is important, and the idea of anywhere, anytime, anyone, you can feel. And then, oops, what's going on here? I can't really move my, there we go. Okay. And again, reminders of the refugee camp being these images of myself, and making work from those images, the idea of stitching and restitching these memories that I'll never have back. They only live through these photos because I don't actually recollect it myself, but it was an extremely violent time, and I definitely have that in my body as a lived experience. This is a work I'm really proud of that's was just done in 2018, and unfortunately we had to take it down, but this is a structure that is displayed as public art in front of my own yard, and it's a welcome sign for the most part. It's an introduction of ourselves as neighbors and as cultural art makers and people in a neighborhood that is being gentrified, and that artists are oftentimes a part of that. But this is my way of extending myself into the community and making ourselves known through art, and sort of repositioning our home and our place within the neighborhood as people who want to have conversations, and who want to engage, and who want to take down fences and make art, and not necessarily people who are there to destroy the neighborhood and get rid of people. These are other themes in the work that I'm going to flash through because you'll see it coming up. I owe a lot to Java Cafe and Gallery in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, because when I moved there and lived in Cambodia for almost 5 years, they really gave me the space, the time, and the support through Dana Linglao, who is a really amazing human being who took a lot of risks on a lot of Cambodian artists. And that's Cambodian artists who are both native born there and people who were displaced and became diasporic Cambodians. But that was a very important cultural center for the arts and the contemporary arts in Cambodia. And it was a real home for me during my residency in Cambodia. And you'll see there are many, many performances that I've done, and some are performed for the moment of capturing it as photography or as video, and then others exist as experiences that other people get to engage in, like the public square. What was an exercise and a test, which is what this image was, to see if we can truly make a place to conversate anywhere, including in the middle of traffic, to finally the 24-hour version where I ask other artists to take a seat and leave one of the other seats empty, so that the random public can engage with the artist in a public setting. This is my response to the idea that with young artists in Cambodia, they felt like they had to make work in a studio and follow this very westernized notion of making art. And so this work, The Public Square, sort of turns that over. There's definitely a homage to Marina Abramovich in this work. With her, the artist is present, and this is just my way of asking the artists of Cambodia to have a 1 hour moment with whoever takes this other seat, so that they can have a private conversation in the middle of a public square, which doesn't really exist. There are no public squares in Cambodia where there is a free exchange of ideas and let alone protests. So this is me making our own public square and putting it in a public setting, and again, taking the artist out of the studio into the public and having these random conversations with anyone and everyone who comes. Another work of art, this is in Fukuoka, Japan, and part of the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum. It's a performance that talks about motherhood and Japanese contemporary women, working women's identity, and it's really about questioning the place for working mothers in a Japanese society that often is aware of people's sort of ability to make themselves small and not cause any trouble in public spaces. And oftentimes in my interviews with working mothers in Japan, they felt they were seen as a nuisance oftentimes in public spaces, even though they're supposed to be designated spaces for women and women and children. Oftentimes that's ignored because women are supposed to kind of be mindful of everybody else, and not the other way around, where the public should be mindful of women and their children and their kids. We can talk about this more, but I basically take on this character who's a bride and a mother, and I use my real baby, who's only a few months old. At the stage, I believe she's 4 or 5 months here, and I was still breastfeeding, and those were all part of sort of negotiating for this residency, to make sure that I could come and attend and be with my family and make work that resonated with not only what I originally submitted around notions of feminism, but also taking into mind some of the issues that I had researched about women in Japan, and again, my interest in working mothers. And most of my performances, I don't talk. So this is an interesting moment with the consulate, the consulate who worked to represent Cambodia, in Cambodia, but Japanese. And then, being able to work with actual working mothers in a choreography piece and do a kind of interventionist piece in the museum itself, because a lot of mothers did not feel like they were welcomed in these contemporary art museums. And so this was us sort of reclaiming that space for mothers and children. There are very simple pieces I do. This piece, again, was a response to a situation that arose during a residency I had in Burma, in Myanmar. and specifically female artists were subjected to some very rude behaviors that were misogynistic. So I decided to change my performance last minute and do this work called Push, in which I tape a bunch of eggs, uncooked eggs, so just regular eggs, taped to my body, and then I wear a traditional outfit of some kind, and I make men make a circle around me, and I proceed to ask them to try to push me down. And obviously, with every push, they are breaking the fragile eggs that are beneath this, but because I've had self-defense lessons, I never fall down, and men really get into this performance in really trying to push me down. And I recreated that push performance during my first year of teaching at a university in Hartford, Connecticut. And so here you see the president of the university trying to push me down. It's actually kind of hilarious. And there you see the eggs taped to my body at the very end of the performance. For this one, because it was performed in a church, I just decided that I would be the sacrifice, the idea of the sacrificial lamb, and also it was about issues related to, the sacrifices women have had to make oftentimes at the hands of misogyny and a patriarchal system. And so I'm asking people to basically take out their anger at me by smashing me with eggs. They can throw it, they can come up to me, but the performance isn't done until all 99 eggs are completely gone. And so you see that. And then, there are many, many performances I've done over the years, and I'm going to just flash through it so we can get to sort of the later works. And a lot of my work is highly visual. I set up an environment for things to happen. Maybe it's a space for people to play with objects that find a way into my work, with objects that represent the landscape that I'm in. I sort of use that in context and out of context, and sometimes even create my own sculptures that are larger than life. And so this is the little red stool that's very typical in the landscape of Southeast Asia that I've now made as a giant red stool. And then I have done variations of the work as a memorial installation, and then as a photographic series in these, the Enter series is what I call it, where I am performing with a piece of cloth and the wind. So this is the Cambodian wind shaping these images and creating these performative moments. And then I create photographic collages, duplicating myself. And those are it's just me playing with the form and playing with identities and multiplicity. And then creating these, incredible garments and dresses that sort of extend from my body out into visual spaces. And this was a really fun time at the beginning of my residency in Cambodia, my first full year, really being free and feeling free to do work that I felt had a sense of beauty, and was an experiment in trying and figuring out what visual installation could look like, and engaging with photography in a lot of my work to document not only sort of the performance itself, but also the extension of the performance with the audience's engagement in the work. The Red Chador is an ongoing work that began in 2015 in Paris. And sorry, I'm going to skip this US context for the work here. And then it traveled from Paris to Hartford to Washington, D.C. And each time I always consider what's the political moment and what's the space I'm in to address certain things that are attached to this image for this particular piece of a Muslim woman. And I always take the work out to the public. This is in San Francisco, and have a few hours out in public. This is after Donald Trump was elected the first time, and when I didn't know what else to do but to be my performances. And so this was an act of protest. And since he was going to ban Muslims from coming into the country, which he tried to do, this was my way of addressing that. And then I also got to perform in Hong Kong with 99 protest signs. And that, again, the political moment at the time was just after the Hong Kong umbrella movement, the first time they protested. This art fair was happening after all of that went down. And so I felt that this character, the Red Chador, needed to take a stance and pay tribute to the Hong Kong activists. Malaysia was the last time the original Red Chador was seen at the Biennale. And then I started to create pieces in which she was multiplied. The idea here is there's 33 of her, and as a triptych series, which is what it was intended to be, there would be a total of 99, because I'm constantly playing with the idea of 99 formalistically. It's the 99 names of God. It's 99 as a powerful number in Islamic numerology and mysticism. And so this is a montaged, collaged image performing in real time, but it's obviously flattened on a two-dimensional surface. And then the Red Chador disappeared. It was taken from me. The last appearance was in Palestine in transit, but the luggage disappeared after I left Tel Aviv, Israel. And unfortunately, I never got the garment back, even though I never really performed in persona in Palestine. So I ended up the next year just performing memorial exhibitions in her honor. And again, creating works out of loss and out of grief, and making my own rituals that were at this time both Muslim and Buddhist, and honoring her work, her death, and her disappearance. And then that brings us to sort of her resurrection, right? If I'm talking about religion. And so what I decided to do was multiply her by allowing other people to join the Red Chador, that this time in the recreation of the new version of the work, she would never be alone again, because she died alone and she disappeared alone. This time she gets to come back to life with a lot of other sisters, and a lot of other people get to be part of this. And so you see this one is the second part of what will be a triptych. You saw the first one where it's all red, and then you see this one, which is 33 with all the different colors. And this is in Hawaii, and so it's an interesting juxtaposition of both veiled and unveiled bodies in this context. And then, the work at Wei-Ling Gallery, the Buddhist Bug, is, of course, one of the works that is what I'm most known for. And it is about otherness, it is about exiled bodies, and it is about living a very fractured existence and feeling othered and foreign in spaces and places in which you think is home, but you're always looked at as if you're not from there and that you're a kind of creature. And so this is the series. It took 10 years to really fully create this work, from 2009 until 2015, and then the work kept being exhibited all the way until 2019, which was the major solar show at Wei-Ling Gallery. And the bug continues to still have interest. People, galleries, institutions still coming to me for this work and interested in this work. This work has never come to the US in a big way, and so that is something I'm interested in trying to figure out for the Buddhist bug. The Buddhist bug has traveled everywhere around the world, even to Lithuania, and yet it's never come here to America, where it began, because the concept for the work began with my graduate studies in Chicago, and the prototype I created while being a graduate student. This work is really fun and engaging, especially for children. I think that's the most rewarding thing, and maybe because I'm a mother, I love that kids engage with such an innocence, and adults too, I have to say, and a playfulness that is unmatched by any other audience members. Kids are really phenomenal to include in the performances and these moments of engagement. And so I want to share, because I kind of didn't interrupt myself doing this, but to go back. So the Buddhist bug, I feel, is sort of complete for its chapter, but the Red Chador series and this idea of the veiled Muslim woman is not. And so that work is what you see here in these images, which I've just completed for the Shangri-La Museum of Islamic Art, Culture, and Design, based in Honolulu. And we really owe Shangri-La a lot of gratitude for the resources and their support and belief in the regeneration of the work. And so these images were created out of that residency, and also working with Honolulu-based artists to embody the other 6 chadoras, is what I call them, and really taking over the Shangri-La Museum itself and having these amazing moments juxtaposed to this backdrop of the Doris Duke collection on Islamic art. And it's a spectacular landscape, but it's also, I think, really talks about the kind of creation mythology I'm interested in her rebirth. It makes sense that she is birthed out of the volcanic ashes, literally, of these islands, and that the rainbow itself, the Anunu by Hawaiian people, is significant because there is a connection and an idea of it being a pathway for celestial bodies. And so it really, it wasn't planned, but through the research, it just made sense that her rebirth should come from sort of the far reaches of the American empire, which is Hawaii. You know, Hawaii has a lot of issues around sovereignty, which is a movement that is still being fought by Hawaiian people. And Hawaii, as a state of the U.S., stood up against Donald Trump's initial ban against Muslims. So their legislatures really stood up against Trump for that. And so I thought it was really powerful that all these things came together to make this work, and to have a chance to engage in Hawaii as the place of rebirth and regeneration, resurrection for the Red Chador, to eventually make it back to mainland US and other parts of the world.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, thank you so much, Anida. That was really interesting to see such a beautiful work, you know, and I think we're all very happy to be able to, have a preview of this work. It was also really interesting to see your body of work from the earlier days till today, and how they actually evoke questions of identity, home, belonging, women, motherhood, loss and grief, all of this. And I think what makes it really powerful is also the fact that it's responding to different cultural contexts. Starting from Cambodia, Japan, Myanmar, where you had your residency, the US, Honolulu. I think that this is what really makes your art powerful. In terms of questions, for now, there are no questions, but there are a few responses that I'd like to read out for you. So one of our attendees said, I'm viewing from the unceded lands of the Duwamish people, or Seattle. Also, there's another response, tuning in from Tongva land, also known as Long Beach, California, USA. So yeah, thank you all for coming, for being here with us. I see that you're attending from all over the world. Okay, yes, there's one question. What has been your grounding practice before performance? Especially curious how the memorials were organized. Yeah.
That's a good question. So the memorials there were 3 different memorials in 3 different countries, and that is because the exhibition and performance opportunities were booked before the loss of the original garment. And so I really sort of scrambled to think about, first of all, I had to grieve myself from the loss. And what you didn't get in the presentation is that it is a chain of losses. And that is to say that a lot of my works have been destroyed, like as a result of vandalism, to fires that have destroyed the back storage of a gallery in Cambodia, to the disintegration of a dress piece that I had created from these Indian cotton cloth diapers that I had stenciled time on it to talk about my family legacy and history, and I made this open back dress of which I had a scribe write fragments of my family's history that created a kind of palimpsest effect on my back, where they would write a fragment of my history, which is something I wrote, and then they would try to erase it, wash it off, and the ink would then stain the dress, and then write another moment, and then repeat that, trying to create an erasure, but particles of the ink would stain the dress and would become part of the dress. That dress has disintegrated as a result of these old cloth diapers that had a kind of detergent on it that was deteriorating the material. So that was a loss. I've had dresses that rusted to death, rusted by a flood, like in Cambodia, again, where the dresses were stored, and because there was a metal wire that ran through, like that beautiful red dress is completely destroyed because it rusted to death. And then there is the termites. The black and white dress, which is 100% linen, was eaten by thousands of termites. Again, due to my storage issues in Cambodia. The bug itself, the Buddhist bug right now actually exists in 2 different countries in parts. One is right where Amanda is in Kuala Lumpur. They have a huge segment of the Buddhist bug, and then the other segment is here in Tacoma, here in my own storage. And so that's really interesting just to think about that work. And then you have the loss of the red chador work and that garment. And so for me, all of those really kind of hit the roof with the loss of the red chador, because this was a work I was attached to. This was a work that I saw a future in. And so when that work was taken from me in Tel Aviv and I knew that it would never be returned, I had to pause a minute and think, well, am I supposed to just recreate this right away? No, I am feeling grief. I am feeling immobile. I am feeling a sense of paralysis in this moment. I can't just whip up another garment. It doesn't make any sense. How do I honor like what I've done, who this persona was, and the hundreds of people the Regidor had come into contact with. And so that's when I got the idea from a friend of mine who said, well, you need to like eulogize her. And that was my colleague at work at the university. And that's when I said, wow, that is it. I need to memorialize her. I need to make, to write myself out of this. So going back to my roots as a writer and as a poet, I then, decided that I was definitely going to write the eulogy. Then I was going to hire someone to write the obituary, who was a reporter. And so I made an entire newspaper in multiple languages out of her obituary. And again, honoring the death. And then because I had booked these exhibitions in Philadelphia, USA, in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and then in Adelaide, Australia, I decided to talk to the curators and tell them that I would like to still take the opportunity, but it's going to be a memorial. And so the US one was a very American memorial. That was a Cambodian-American experience. It had that kind of wake feel. And there were a lot of photos sort of up of past performances that would be presented as if it was in a house. Like a lot of people use mixed tiles to create their kind of home. And then in Cambodia, I really got to perform a ritual that I created as someone who's Muslim, and honoring also that I'm in Cambodia and the presence of Buddhism. And so I really created and stitched together this idea of, burning a little bit of the dress and burying it in sand, and then creating a ritual for other people to help light an altar to her, saying my own prayers in public and doing Arabic chants. And so, in creating my own mandala, like things like that, that were really important symbols of honoring a ritual that I essentially had to create, because this is a character, this is a persona. And then in Adelaide, it is a similar thing, but this time I also read the full eulogy, like to really honor the work. And this was the last memorial, and so the eulogy was actually read by myself as the performance artist, reading on her, and also performing the ritual, and putting up the sort of decorum of what it means to mark a space of death, to mark a space of memory.
Okay, I see here that we've got 3 questions, and I think that's just right to end the session. So before I read out the questions, there's just one response. Hello from Narm, Melbourne, Australia, acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri Yeri-Woi, Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. Sovereignty was never ceded. Okay, the first question, Anida, you seem to work in diverse locations across Asia and the United States, from Hong Kong, Japan, and Hawaii. What is your research process like before you can conceive of a new work for this diverse locus?
So that is an excellent question, because I don't just go to a location and then just like whip something up, and it isn't about geography in that sense. Like a lot of people think of site-specific work as geographic and like a landscape, and how that work would visually look in that landscape. I think of my work as more, what's the community? Who's the community that's there? And what's the political moment? What is that political moment in terms of what is happening, like on a geopolitical level, that is something that I cannot escape, and that is affecting how people might engage with the work. So context is everything for me. But I also understand that every persona I create is a displaced entity. And so I'm working with the ideas of displacement and what it means to be a transnational artist, and in many ways, a transnomadic artist in that sense, that the work can go to different communities and be offered, but in exchange for a conversation, right? So like when the invitation is to Fukuoka, you know, of course you put together a package and you have a vague idea of what you want to propose. And then if that is accepted, so my proposal was around trying to compare and contrast contemporary feminism between Cambodian working women and Japanese working women. And that for me was a result of information during that year, 2015, in which Japan was facing a low birth rate, one of the lowest birth rates around the world. And this was directly rooted in working mothers wanting to work, or women wanting to work and choosing to work instead of having families because they were forced to, basically you have to choose one or the other, right? And so when it came time for that proposal to go forward, they had a real issue with me being just giving birth. And they wanted me to come, stop breastfeeding, and come without my child. And that was not going to happen. And I thought it was just so ironic. And so there was a lot of pushing on my end to say, no, I can't do your residency unless you honor the fact that I am breastfeeding my child. My child is coming with me. If my child comes with me, I need the rest of my family to come with me because I have to have help. And if you aren't going to hire, you know, someone to help me with my child, then my partner is going to have to come because he collaborates anyway with me. And so, you know, so I'm talking about, like, again, what's the moment? The moment is my negotiating as a working mother to have this moment happen under the harsh eyes of curators who want something at the end of this, right? And so the white mother is such an interesting piece to do a case study on in terms of like what working women artists have to go through to get work done while raising a family, you know. And then to further answer that question about other contexts, it's not about just hanging the work. And it's not about just donning a costume to come in and like play your character. It's never that for me. So that is why the Red Chador has always changed. In Paris, it was a beheading series where she took baguettes, 99 French baguettes, and did an execution. And this was because it was post Charlie Hebdo, the massacre of the cartoonists, and all of the headlines around it was about you know, was seeing Muslim women, Muslim people as terrorists, as killers. And then they were using a lot of headlines at the time in the world because of ISIS, were using the word beheadings in relationship to executions. You know, they didn't just say they were killings or executions, they had to use the word beheadings. And this is a very, it's a political moment because they want, you know, the media and the power of the media want you to see Muslims as savages and as cruel, right? And so I'm working with all of that and thinking about colonialism of French people in Cambodia and in like Muslim majority countries, and then France having the ban on the burqa. You know, so there, it's very layered how I think and how I move pieces. And then when the piece came to the US in Washington, D.C., that is the capital of the US. You know, you have to think about what that means. And because I was performing during Memorial Weekend, everybody is waving flags. And so for me, the flag had to come. The flag had to be a forest, 99 flags all around her, is almost like to say, am I a patriot? Do I get to be a patriot even if I'm veiled and like faceless, right? So those are all important. It's the same thing with the Buddhist flag, even though the orange is obviously the most dominant thing. she has different experiences depending on where the work is being performed. So in Singapore, it was in front of the Sultan Mosque, which is a beautiful golden mosque. But, you know, Singapore has also a conservative Muslim community. And so she was really shouted at by some elders who thought she was haram, you know, and so that was a really big deal for that moment. Now, Malaysia, we had an amazing opening performance at Wei-Ling Gallery, and that was probably one of my favorite performances inside a gallery. We didn't get to take her out due to time limitations and resources, but inside the gallery, people were so open. And I think you guys remember some people who did not want to engage. The Buddhist bug opened them up, that they would loosen, because I do this thing where I make contact with people and I tend to soften them up and like be playful and invite them in. And you know, there's a photo with a man, and that was one of the viewers who did not know what he was seeing and did not want to make eye contact. But when he made eye contact, he was like, this isn't bad. Yeah, I do want to play. You know, so those are interesting moments. Always with the Buddhist bug, I think it's one of the most loved pieces because no one sort of feels so violated by her presence.
So yeah. Thank you, Anida. So we just reshared the link to the opening night actually, so you can see what it was like, you know, with the audience interacting, like Anida explained just now. So the next question will be, how has your identity as a Cambodian Muslim American artist been received by citizens across the globe and in the US particularly? And has it created more empathy as you perform in silence and in peace?
Yeah, so one thing I could say about my work shifting from performance poetry, which is very English rooted and it's very spoken, it's a lot of narrative work that is being memorized and given out as poetry. You almost do a kind of original monologue. And that, when I started to tour in 2001 as a poet internationally, my work failed. My work failed to translate. Now, 2001 is a very different time than now. 2001, people weren't speaking English as widely as they are now. And so I would perform in India, I would perform in Vietnam, in Chiang Mai, and then ultimately in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. And people would say, wow, it's so powerful because I feel your energy and you have so much anger and like, but I don't know what you're saying. What are you saying? And so I really felt like my work failed, my performance work failed. And I started watching how musicians and dancers were creating work that spoke to people without using words. And so that year, really, I thought about how can I transition my work to a nonverbal way so that I can create some shared moments that I don't have to over explain. And that is really, for me, it took until 2009 with the formation of the Buddhist bug and other works like the palimpsest piece to look at how text can be internalized and be the sort of basis of a work in terms of like the language I use to build a work, but it doesn't have to be spoken. Instead, I create sort of a visual landscape and I set things up and I use nonverbal communication to elicit empathy and again, to lock people into this moment of making eye contact and doing something and experiencing something they probably don't normally do. So I think it's been very powerful to me. Whether or not it's rooted in my Cambodian Muslim American identity, it's complicated because I'm only seen in these super fractured ways and defined as a Cambodian Muslim American artist here in the US. Outside of the US, I am seen as an American artist or a Cambodian artist. And of course, I force people to put the two together. But in Asia, I really feel like there's a lot of ownership of me being a Cambodian artist, and there's also, they're looking at the work through a lens that isn't often complicated in a very racialized way that the US tends to do. In the US, I tend to have to over-explain the work because they don't get that. I'm talking about the existence of Buddhism and Islam like simultaneous, but in Asia they get it because there is, a plurality that exists. Like even in Malaysia, you have multiple religions. Like people get it. People get these symbols, and you can go sort of quicker into the work itself. But in the US, it's constantly having to explain and over-explain, and I'm a bit tired of that. And so I'm curious to see where I sort of land in the US, because again, the Buddhist bug in particular hasn't made its way over here. And again, I get a lot of resistance in that people here don't realize, the caliber and the scale and the scope of my work. Like I'm not an emerging artist. I am an established artist. And I also get to be choosy about where I show the work because I've shown in major institutions outside of the US.
Okay. And to wrap this up with the last question, and it's a really good one, could you share where your work might be going next, or what direction your interest might lead you to?
Yes, thank you. I have a really big opportunity. Well, first of all, there were a lot of opportunities that were either postponed or canceled, or they just don't know, and that's kind of where we're at in this pandemic time. I think Noor Shkembi is on this call, and she's an amazing Melbourne-based curator, and I have an opportunity to show at Bendigo in Australia, and part of that exhibition and really that is going to be telling the story of the Red Chador, and I get to exhibit with other Muslim artists, and I think it's really, for me, Australia has always been very open and supportive to my work, Australians, and then also just there's an embracing of a plurality, and I think a kind of progressive Muslims have a place there, and so I'm really honored to take the work there. I am also supposed to show at Emory University, and that is in Atlanta. And that might be where the Buddhist bug goes. I have an opportunity through some curators in Boston as well. So there's just a lot of conversations. I think that there's some interest locally here in both, at both the Tacoma Art Museum and Seattle Asian Art Museum to possibly do something here. And then I will return to Honolulu again through a different organization and festival that's being hosted there, and they're interested in another restaging of the Red Chador series, and I would be very excited to reunite with those 6 performers that originally embodied that work, and so I'm hoping to also, so it sounds like I'm not taking a break, which is what I said earlier, that I would take a break. I seriously am taking a break, but I just have these these little bit of opportunities. I don't know where they're going to go. I don't know where this pandemic is going to go. I just know that there are definitely some things coming my way, and I am going to be very careful. So none of this I've said a super yes to, except for Bendigo, because that has been years of conversation to get us to this point. And so that is the one thing that I'm super excited is to take the Red Chador, which has been memorialized in Australia, but to resurrect the story somehow.
Okay, anyway, we are very much, looking forward to see where it's going to lead, and yeah, we're really excited to see more from you. I'm sure everyone agrees that it was a really exciting and inspiring session that we just had with Anida just now. So Anida, thank you for sharing, and thank you everyone for being here. In case you would like to attend the next session, which is with Long Lip Woon, an author, a Malaysian author based in Norway, you're welcome to do so. So just register through the Google Forms link on our Facebook page. Yeah, so it will be at 2 p.m. today. So thank you once again, and that's the end of our session. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.